Welcome to the October edition of the Adaptive Cards Community Call. We meet every month. This is the October 10th at 9 a.m. The next call will be November 14th. It's the second Thursday of every month, same time, same place. Well, actually a different place, slightly less roomy, but hopefully next month I'll have the Teams version that lets me go to the beach and all sorts of things, so you won't have to look at my completely barren office right now. I'm Matt Heidinger. You can find me on Twitter, or I'll have my email scattered throughout this deck. I typically present these. David Close on the team is not able to join us today, so Dana will be our wonderful moderator to joining us. The agenda today is we're going to talk a little bit about the Microsoft Ignite conference coming up next month. We're kicking around the idea of a TAP program. Some of you may be familiar with this. I actually was trying to remember what TAP even stands for. I think it's Technology Adoption Program. It's run by a couple different teams. So we're kicking around this idea of a TAP program. I'll show more about that. But basically using this forum to kind of gauge interest in it and see if that would be useful for folks. A quick run around feature portal updates. The adaptivecards.io website got a nice update. I went through that last month, at least to get some of your feedback, and it's now live. So I'll just do a quick run through of that. And I'm kicking around a new way. Last month we did a survey, the first one. I unfortunately did not do an updated one, but it was really useful. I got a handful of responses that helped us answer some questions that had been on the top of our mind, namely around adaptive cards templating. Had you heard of it? And we're trying to do some experiments to raise awareness of it and really get it to a place where we can feel comfortable releasing it, because I really think templating is a major step forward for productivity and the way you can use adaptive cards. So we're going to explore, that'll be kind of the main meat of the talk and the demo. So the Microsoft Ignite conference is November 4th to 8th. I think it's sold out. So if you're going, I'd love to hear from you. We will be doing a pre-day workshop. I'll be there for at least part of it. It'll be about building modern enterprise productivity apps on the Microsoft 365 platform. These links will be here. I don't know, Dana, if you have this link handy and we can put it in the chat.
So yeah, I'll grab it. So if you sign into your registration, you can go and sign up for the pre-day workshop, which is the pre-26. I will include this as a direct link to that to sign up. And you definitely should. We'll be talking about not only adaptive cards, but it'll include Microsoft Teams and SharePoint and Graph and everything that all links together for the platform.
Yeah, and do you want to also mention
and then the other thing we're doing this year, we're doing a number of small roundtables discussions, and what we're really looking for is feedback from all of you. And so participation, there'll be smaller groups. We don't have it in the schedule builder yet, but it is coming in the next couple days. So if you follow us on Twitter at Office Dev, the Twitter handle, we will post updates and announcements about that. The session scheduler is live. So again, when you go into your Ignite registration, you can look at all of the activities. You can, look up all of the dev sessions, and we'll also be posting those daily during the event. So Sunday, we'll remind everyone about the pre-day. Monday, we'll let you know what breakouts are going on, what theaters are happening. We have community sessions led by MVPs that will be going on around the Microsoft 365 developer platform. And so there's a lot to take advantage of that. And a lot of it is through your registration in that schedule builder, where you can just add everything that you want so that you know what times and locations they all are. And then last, we are going to be, our whole team will be at the hub/expo area, and it is called the Microsoft 365 developer platform. In that area, you can come and visit us, talk to people across the different teams, engineers, marketing people, developers, and kind of just bring everyone together and have that in-person connection. And again, lastly, the Twitter at OfficeDev. If you're not following us, we also do all of our last minute adaptive cards, updates and announcements about community calls and everything else. So go ahead and, definitely follow us on that.
Great. And I'll be there the whole time. Like this pre-day workshop is on Sunday, so the day before the conference. So I'll be there for that. I'll be at a booth for partial for some of the time. But if you don't happen to see me there, I do want to call out the adaptive cards session. You can find it in your schedule builder if you're going. I think it's currently Thursday at 11 a.m. And if you are interested in a one-on-one meeting, or potentially even an interactive session like a focus group, I don't know. Dana might be like, you can't really invite people to that. I don't really know how it works. But if you are interested in a one-on-one meeting, that I can guarantee I can be there for you. So
we can do both.
Okay.
So the focus group, there is one specifically on adaptive cards, and that will be in that breakout session number when you go online, when we have those available. They just haven't been published yet, but you definitely have the opportunity to sign up for that one.
Great. And so I mentioned this TAP program. So this is a group on my team is starting to ramp up. They've run these for a long time, part of a different org, and we're kicking around the idea if there'd be interest in an adaptive cards one. So we set up a new alias, adaptive cards TAP. The gist, like I said, I can't remember what it even stands for. I think it's Technical Access Preview or Technology Adoption Program or something like that. But it's basically reach out to this email address, see if you'd be interested in it. It's basically a forum where you can expect a little bit more regular checkpoints and some one-on-one support. It's interesting because Adaptive Cards is a very open project. You guys see everything as I build it, sometimes the day before. So there's already a lot of access to the team. But if there is interest in maybe a less public forum, especially if you're, an ISV and you don't necessarily feel comfortable sharing certain things in a public forum, this might be a good opportunity for you. So if you have any interest in that, please reach out and we'll use that interest to gauge whether we should invest in really ramping this program up or not. Okay. So this is a little bit of recap from last month. So maybe go get a coffee if you were here last month, or if you're in some other part of the world, maybe it's happy hour. Certainly not here yet, but there's this link, ak.ms/AC features will take you to this portal on the new adaptivecards.io site. So this was reviewed with everybody last month to get feedback on it. So it got a nice refresh. It finally tells you, you can just get to better stuff. You can get to, if you want to jump immediately into Microsoft Teams, if you really want to start rendering cards, maybe you have you need the scenario of extensibility, or you just want to share UI between multiple apps. If you want to design cards anywhere or in your app, we help you get to that. And then a little bit about templating. So adaptivecards.io finally, and the same with there's announcements. So the blog post that we do, so this was the community call from September. It's posted on the Office Developer blog and here at adaptivecards.io. But the main thing, aside from the website, is this roadmap section. And that link is your easiest way to get to what are all the things the team is looking at. It's very easy to vote on these things. So last month, I added this whole section on templating, again, to try and understand what are the features of templating people are most interested in, and we'll use that to influence where we go throughout the next year. For example, there's 3 votes on live data binding. So this right now, cards are very much you deliver them and they stay the way they are. And you do have ways to refresh them you can redraw the entire content, but they can't really stay live to the data that's behind them if you want to update something more frequently. This is, take templating on a preview. It's a simple way to say, hey, I really like what you're doing with adaptive cards templating. I'm really interested in it, but I'm, maybe my company or just myself, I'm a little risk averse on adopting previews. I want to know it's a little more stable. So it's trying to understand how how strongly should we be working on getting out a preview? The challenge with templating, as we'll see as we get into the demo, is it really is a new language, if you will. It's a new syntax and expression syntax in JSON that lets you bind to data, but there's also conditionals because you need to sometimes tweak the template, the look of the template. But I don't want to get too far ahead of myself because some of you may not even know what templating is. But this is your place to know everything at a nice user-friendly way of what we're considering. So portability improvements like responsive UI, input validation is an incredibly hot topic. We are very much working on this. Client-side data binding, or more, I guess, client-side interactivity. So when you maybe a cascading drop-down type thing, dynamic search, rating controls, everything you can kind of expect. Microsoft Flow. So right now you can use adaptive cards in Microsoft Flow, which is fantastic. You don't have to write any code and you can start sending cards into Teams. They don't have any actions today, though. They can't support actions where you click on a button in Teams and it kicks off another flow. So this is our way of knowing. We're working on that, and we're hopefully have something to announce soon on that. But this is your way to start to influence where we go. And it's very easy. If you're familiar with user voice, it's very simple. You just click on something. You just have to give an email address. You don't need to create a password or an account. Just tell us your email address and why this is important to you. And then we go through this and really help understand and categorize your feedback. So that's your best way to really start influencing the direction of adaptive cards as you get more involved. So you can go to this aka.ms/AC features, or just go to adaptivecards.io now and click on Roadmap. So that was kind of, I guess I'll sort of skip this because we refreshed the website. If you have thoughts on it, I would absolutely love to hear them. If it's good, bad, ugly, does it help you get started? Does it help you? The interesting thing about the Adaptive Cards website, similar to, or rather opposed to many marketing type websites that are really just about teaching you about the product, which serves a fantastic function, and adaptivecards.io does do that. It really serves as our interactive documentation with the Schema Explorer. Just to quickly go over to that really quick. Oh, hang on. Adaptivecards.io. It serves a handful of functions along the top. So the homepage obviously helps you get started and understand what this is, but the Schema Explorer is your best place to understand, well, what can I do with adaptive cards? If I'm putting in a text block, what are the properties available to me, the version they were introduced, and then we usually have some example card that shows how that property works. So the color property has these options. So these are your typical color options. We added a font type so you can start to do monospace in version 1.2. Alignment, subtle, you get the idea. So we have these examples. You can click try it yourself, and that will take you to the designer. And this is obviously a key tool. We're constantly investing in this tool. The main demo I'm going to show with templating is the next evolution of this tool. But the website itself serves a lot of purposes for people who have no idea what adaptive cards are to the people who are actively using it every day. So it's a pretty broad spectrum. It's a pretty broad group of people to keep happy. So if you are happy with it, cool. We like thumbs up. If you have thoughts on an improvement, absolutely reach out to me. And if you're a curious developer who was interested in how it's built, I might actually do a community call if we have a slow month on how the website is built. There were a couple survey responses that said they'd be interested in that last month. But you can go to this pull request and just poke around the code. But the neat thing is the website is entirely static HTML. There's no server hosting this. It's hosted in Azure Blob Storage as just flat files. And it's built out of assets in our repository. So all of this comes from the schema file, the JSON schema file that describes this. So we have a single source of truth, if you will. That means if we fix something there or we add a better descriptor to the actions property, we just have to build the website. You edit that schema file and it's saved everywhere. All these samples you see, for example, all those text block ones, these are just JSON files in the repository that we look up by naming convention. So this one is called textblock.color.json, and we mash up all those things from the GitHub repository, exports this as a big HTML site, and then we just host it. And it's neat. I'm a recent convert on I was a big ASP.NET MVC dev, but this thing scales basically infinitely. There's just no server, and it's not perfect for every site, but it's kind of an interesting concept to maybe where it makes sense to rethink how sometimes we do web hosting. So if you're at all curious in that, I'd be happy to talk about it. You can comment in this PR, but pull request 3261, which has been merged, has pretty much everything you would need. Okay, let's get into the meat of the talk. So I want to do a couple things. There's an announcement in here that the .NET Templating SDK is released. Sorry, these slides aren't very pretty. They were put together minutes ago as I was trying to figure out how to best massage these things. So we're going to spend the bulk of this time not in PowerPoint and more in some demos. But this is the responses from the community call last month, where I had asked, have you tried adaptive cards templating? And this blue was like 35% or something along that, who just said, I'm not sure what adaptive cards templating is, which was somewhat surprising. I don't fully, I want a better understanding of this audience, which is why I'm a little disappointed that I didn't prepare another survey, because it was just such a cool way to understand why you're here and learn a little bit about you. And as long as I do a good job keeping it to, a 5-minute survey, it's just really useful insights. But the hypothesis that I formed from this is that we have an awareness problem on templating, and let's try to raise awareness and see if some of our metrics, get better as far as are people trying it, are they satisfied with it. A couple of you did say you are waiting until it exits preview. That's understandable, and a couple of you are using the preview and hopefully using it successfully. But what we're going to talk about today is a quick lap around what the heck is adaptive cards templating. It's previously been very tucked away in somewhat secret URLs. Not secret, but we don't really publish them anywhere. For example, you would have to go to vnext.adaptivecards.io, and then you would get a designer build that has templating in it. But before I get ahead of myself, let's talk about a little bit what templating is. So I will share this link for those of you who are interested in following along. The other really cool thing about a static HTML website is if I go to GitHub, what is it? Polls 35. Yeah. So this pull request 3505 was where I just tried to looking at the survey, and I was starting to think, how can we increase awareness of adaptive cards templating? And I make some updates to the website. The really neat thing, though, is when I open a pull request, we build the website based on that pull request, and then you have a nice handy link just in blob storage. So every PR has its own link where you can start to play with a custom version of the site, which makes it really cool that I can then share it with you folks. So that's what you're looking at here. It looks like adaptivecards.io, but it's not. It's a build of it that has some of these changes that are in this pull request. And so what are some of these changes? Well, the first one should be somewhat obvious. Right at the top here, I've changed the toolbar of the designer just slightly. We've always had this host app docs button. I added an icon to make it a little more clickable. This is, I want to call this out, nothing to do with templating. Host app docs is your best place to learn what works where. So what version of the schema works. We are actively working on improving. This is, again, another very short tangent. We are working on, hopefully by Ignite, a version of the designer that has a target version dropdown. So you can, if you're building a card for Teams, which currently supports 1.0, we are working on updating them. But right now, you're in a bit of a dilemma that you can technically use features that were added in 1.2 in the designer. The designer will happily let you build a 1.2 card with maybe features that we added. But then you try to use that card and you send it to Teams, and it just doesn't work. or it works differently because Teams is on 1.0. So we're working on improving that. The designer will start to roll back itself. So if you say, hey, I really only want to limit to the features that are 1.0, for example, rich text block didn't exist back in 1.0, but you can happily drag one on here. This will make that easier. In the meantime, the host apps docs page is your best place to see, okay, here's all the hosts, at least the official Microsoft supported hosts, including some of our third parties. So Cisco WebEx we announced last month. It's a huge win for the community and I think the industry on getting to a place of a universal card exchange format. So Cisco WebEx Teams adopted adaptive cards for their collaboration platform, and they're on version 1.1. They embed the designer. They're a key partner asking for this feature because they get confusion from their customers that I can build a card that won't quite work. So there's host app docs. The button next to it is templating docs, and that does exactly what you would expect. It helps you learn about adaptive cards templating. And again, you can follow along on this link from the chat, and if you feel like playing with it. So that's great. That at least is, okay, here's a button. People will be like, well, what the heck's templating? And now you sort of get a basic understanding. And templating enables the separation of data from the layout in the adaptive card. And why is that helpful? Well, it helps you design a card once and then populate it with real data. And the demo I was trying to build that I don't think it's working. We'll give it a shot at the end. Well, you know, how is that helpful? Well, if you build a card, like a stock card, and for example, I'll go to adaptivecards.io. This is a very common way that we watch users learn about adaptive cards. Here's a whole bunch of samples. So you kind of click through it. You're like, oh, okay, I can build a stock card, or at least a card that looks like stock data. The trick, though, is Microsoft Corp, September, the price, all of these things are baked right into the payload itself. So to populate this with real data, or if you're building a bot that wants to say, well, I obviously don't only care about Microsoft stock, maybe I care about another stock, you have to build up this card manually. You have to add your own. Maybe you can do some kind of string replace. You can use a template engine such as Razor for .NET. If you're a .NET developer, you can use a template engine. You can use the .NET library, the adaptive cards library, and start building up a card in objects. And I'll quickly show that just to give you an idea. I remember I had a method in here. This is an old demo that some of you might remember if you're frequent joiners. This was a demo from back in April, I think. But this is effectively what we ask you to do. We say install the .NET adaptive cards library, new up an adaptive card, new up the body, new up a container, set its items. Here's the text block that has the company name and then the exchange and then the symbol. And this works, and it works okay. You know, I mean, it'll get you the same thing. This is the exact same card, the stock card that you just saw, except now you're stuck in this object model. You have, I've been writing adaptive cards now for 3 years, so I can sort of matrixy visualize like what the heck this thing would look like with a column set and a column, and okay, here's some text blocks. But it's not great. It's certainly not ideal, and it's certainly not user-friendly. You should be able to see this in the designer. Obviously, though, if you try and just paste this C# in, the designer is going to have no idea what you're trying to do. It's effectively a one-way thing, whereas, you know, now you can't take this card, right? This doesn't work. This isn't JSON. You're in bad territory there. So how can we make it so you can write a template once, design it, fill it with data? If you want to change it someday, put it back in the designer, you know, a much more user-friendly experience. That is, in a nutshell, what templating is trying to solve. And I wish the demo was working, but hopefully I can at least try and help you follow along in this code. By the way, the demo is not working because the stock data provider, IEX Trading, has a new API that they want everyone to move to, and unfortunately you need to register. They used to have a completely free API that you could hit to get stock data back in March when I made this, and they no longer have that. The API is shut down, and they're migrating you to a new thing. So that's a bit of a bummer. I'm hoping to fix it. I was trying to get it working. I think I don't have the bot emulator open anymore. Hopefully trying to get that fixed. And then my plan is I'll just publish this on GitHub as a really simple sample. So just to see the code though, what we don't want you to have to do is write any code like this anymore, to manually convert that JSON into an object model just to fill it with real data. It's asking a lot out of you. I think we can do better. So the second version of this is this much smaller method where basically what it does, it says, hey, send an adaptive card. Here's the template name and here's the data. And the data is just a C# object. To get the template, if you're familiar with .NET APIs, all I'm basically saying is I've got a templates folder in my project. I wish I could make that a little bigger. I'm sorry, that's pretty small. I can make the code bigger, but hopefully if you can see in Solution Explorer, there's a templates folder. And here's our templates. These are adaptive card templates. All they are is an adaptive card like you know and love today with these curly braces that will be injected or merged with the data at runtime. And so this makes it very easy such that I can take this card. Actually, let's dive in and let's see what we're working with. Let's take this exact card, and I can go to this README here. This will be good. Okay, so like I mentioned, on vNext, we have a version of the designer with data binding. My hope is, before Ignite, by the next time we all talk, is adaptivecards.io will have data binding and templating enabled by default. And what that means is you're basically going to get two new windows here. So here's what you see today. This pull request, the link that I sent you, let's start closing this. Let's just go back to it. PR 3505. If I click on the designer, imagine this is basically what adaptivecards.io is going to be. It's going to have the templating docs. The main difference in here is that there is this sample data and a link to what's this. This is obviously templating. So what I'm going to do is paste in that template, or that H1. This is that template straight from my project. So if I ever want to edit a template or send it to a designer to improve, I just have to say, here's the real template that my app is using. And then I can take it back into a design time experience, paste this in here, and you can see, oh, okay, here's these tokens, $name. But what if you want to see what this card would look like at design time with real data? And that's what this sample data editor is for. So I'm going to clear this out, type in a little bit of JSON, and it looks like, okay, this template expects value, some property called name. So I'm going to say name, and it's going to be Matt Heidinger. You notice nothing changed. This is where that preview mode button comes into play. So I can click on this, and this is going to toggle the card from design mode to preview mode. And it is effectively showing what that would look like with real data. So this is helping you design the card, see what it would look like at design time. And then at runtime, you would obviously pass this as an object to the template engine. You would hit your data service, you would query who is the current user, but as long as you send it an object that is in this format, you will be able to reuse this template in a much better way with real data back at design time. But so you can see the card still isn't completely right. We're missing some other things in here. So what are some other things that it can do aside from just the simple property binding? I think so. It looks like there's suggested symbols, which is an array, and then I think I put in just MSFT, Goog, APL, and now, okay, cool. So now this card looks exactly how I want it to look at runtime. It says, welcome to the Adaptive Card Stock Bot, Dana. Enter a stock symbol to get the latest quote. For example, MSFT. And then I put in a bunch of buttons here that if you click on them, they will basically pull up a quote for that. So these are just some suggested things to help a user get started, to learn the bot. And you can see the way I improve that is just by this data, suggested symbols. In the real bot, the one that I built, what that actually hits is an API that the IEX trading site offers called gainers, and it's basically just the top moving stocks. So instead of it being MSFT, Google, and Apple, it's the whatever were the three top changes over the last 24 hours. So it's a dynamically created list, which is great. I'm now hitting an API. My template never changed. The template stays exactly the same. It's just the data that I'm passing. So I think T is like AT&T and like S is Sprint, and maybe did T-Mobile buy Sprint? Something maybe that doesn't exist anymore, but you get the idea. I can just put in random things here. If I want a fourth one, I can add a fourth one, and now a new button showed up. So clearly it can like iterate over arrays in the template. So it does some pretty neat things. So hopefully that helps appreciate why we're adding templating. Hopefully it makes your life a lot easier in working with adaptive cards and just filling them with real data. There's a handful of other supplemental benefits as well. For example, it makes transmission over the wire smaller. If we get to a world where we do want to get to, where our major clients like Teams, et cetera, supports client-side data binding, so it can fetch a template and then just send data. Imagine if I could just send this data to Teams, not the whole card. Look how big the card is, and this is a relatively small card. If you look at just the wire transfer, if I had to send this whole card every time, that's fine. But if you're trying to do a rapidly transmitted thing and you reuse the same template, in most cases, just sending the data will be a lot lighter. So you start to get some benefits in just wire transmissions. Helps create a great looking card just from the data. So this is an interesting piece. And then this other kind of one is a little bit, we don't know where this is going to go, but the hope or the expectation is that AI and maybe other services could improve user experiences if they understand the data. And I'll explain a little bit more about that as we get more into templating. I'm monitoring the chat. It doesn't look like there are any questions on this. If you have any questions on templating, please do let me know if they're like clarifying questions. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep going, and hopefully you get the gist of templating. And now we're going to get into what I think is some helpful ways to improve on what we have today. So that's templating, that being the designer. The designer would come with data binding built in. And to use it, I'll just add, you can use templating today. And if you go to the templating documentation and click on templating SDKs, the templating effectively, just to really quickly summarize, is a template language. This is where you'll go to learn all about the language itself, how to bind to arrays, how to write functions or more advanced stuff. This is where you learn about the template language itself. The templating SDKs are the way that you would use it. So it's very simple, and this demo shows that now we have the .NET one. The major announcement here is that the .NET templating package is available. It is technically in an alpha form. That's why the stuff is still preview, and we will have some API breaking changes. This API, we called it a transformer. Probably won't continue calling it a transformer, or if we do, it'll at least match the API of the JavaScript package. So they do have slightly different APIs, but they do essentially the same thing. They say, here's the template payload. It's this with some tokens. Here's the data payload. And then you say template.expand, and that gives you a full card. It just merges the two. So if you're interested in templating, these are the two SDKs that'll help you get started. For a lot of cases, especially if you're doing this server-side stuff and you just want to start updating some of your cards and start taking advantage of it, I think it's probably at a place good enough that you could start to use it, as long as you're comfortable with some very minor breaking changes. I mean, the API itself is pretty small. It's just here, you new up the thing and you say, here's my template, here's my data, and we combine the two. The API won't get much more advanced than that. So that's how you would get started. But what if you just want to get started a little bit learning it? You know, you're not quite at a place where you're building an active app. That's where, let's go to samples here. So I wanted to re-envision the samples page that we just showed. Remember how I said, okay, we've got a stock card, we've got a restaurant card, you know, that looks like a restaurant. We've got weather card. But these samples don't help you go anywhere with them. You like I mentioned, you have to start filling it with your own data. So this section is what doesn't exist today. So there's a giant toggle button there that says use adaptive card templating. And if I turn that on, when I turn that on, and again, you can follow along with this URL, instead of having one giant JSON payload, we're now going to get two. And the two that appear are the data JSON, as you'd expect, and the template JSON. And the card itself has been updated. So now I can start to see, and we'll do the same thing with the stock card. So here is the data that is bind to, and then here is the template that's used. And here's what I was getting at with some of those conditions. So take this example. Here is this arrow, this arrow Unicode character. Well, if the stock is down, as in the data shows that it's down, and I think it's binding to latest change or something. Where does it bind to? Change, which is currently $2.69. So if this was a negative, well, we want that to be a down arrow, right? And if it's also in green, if the stock is down, we want it to be colored in red. So that's where you can start writing these inline expressions. So if change is greater than or equal to 0, we're going to use the color good. Otherwise, we're going to use the color attention. And let's actually start to play with that. So the next biggest improvement here with samples is try it yourself got a lot better, because it's still going to launch the designer, but it's also going to populate the template and the sample data. And you'll notice the template, it's a little tricky on the eyes. They are a little bit, especially when you get really common or complex ones, because there's a trick here in that if you can massage the data, as in you have the ability to tweak this data a little bit before it gets to the card, or you have like a middleware service that can massage it, you don't have to do such advanced stuff in the templating. In this card, I attempted to use the IEX data as it exactly was. And some of the complexities there are that all of these time formats are in Unix, millisecond, epoch form, whatever that terminology is, where it's basically just a millisecond increase since, whatever the date was. So I have to parse that, right? I have to interpret that as a date and then format it. So when I go to preview mode here, and it's actually broken in the designer currently, but I need to display that, and you'll see here, I need to display it as Friday, May 3rd, 2019. So I have to parse this date in a particular format and then format it locally. And that's where you write a relatively complex expression here where I'm saying parse date from epoch, and then I'm binding to the latest update millisecond time. So it's doing some pretty advanced conversions here to get to the ultimate expression that you see. But it does mean writing the template is a little bit tricky, hence why having this design time experience where you can tweak the sample data and really get a feel for the card is pretty important. But what you're seeing here is that, and let's do like the restaurant one, for example. So the restaurant is the same thing. This data is schema.org data. This is a standardized way. Schema.org is effectively trying to schematize the world. Typically in physical things, but also more and more in like digital artifacts. And this is how, when you go to like Google or Bing and you search for anything, you get all those like cards. They're really, the internet is no longer being scraped like it was. Most of these web pages, like this is taken straight out of Yelp, has these definitions in them, these schemas in them, to help apps and services reason over the web page that they're currently seeing. And schema.org is a standardized way of saying, this is a business, here's its name, here's its URL, here's its address, here's the image. And what's neat about this is my template then takes that data straight out of yelp.com, templates it, and you see it here. So if I click try it yourself, we're gonna do the same thing. We're loading up the template, and if I hit preview mode, now you can see a really nice preview there. I can change this from Malt and Vine to Dana's Pizza, and you can see the card updates. So this is neat. Now I've got this template I can save, and I can do queries at runtime. Maybe you're building a bot that helps local travelers and you just want to search for things. You typically will need to fetch data. As long as the data is returned in a format that the template understands, you will start to see, you just really get this much more reusable, much more reusable thing. So I think that was the gist of what I was trying to get across, and I would like to open up for any feedback here. Does this make sense? Is this helpful? The way this is currently built, I'll just add, if I close this, and I'll just close this tab and reopen and go right back to samples, the toggle button will retain its state. So if you aren't interested in templating and you want the website to behave exactly as it was when you're at samples, that's okay. And I wanted to support that. But by default, templating will be enabled. Those of you who are viewing the website right now will start to see this version of the samples, and I've only done a couple so far. I haven't gone through all of them. For example, if you just go to, weather, it's still the plain old weather card. I haven't done a templated version, but hopefully this helps people start to see what templating can do. It showcases some of the gaps that we have. We're still trying to figure out what the minimum set of functions that you typically need. Typically a templating engine needs things like substring. If you can't massage the data ahead of time, if you have to take the data, maybe it's coming from a third-party service and you're taking it as is, you start to need number formatting. How do I format this as a %? And the way I did that in here was a function called format. It binds to the change % property and then passes this string here at the end is, what do you want to format this as? A % in this case. It could be number. Maybe you're binding to a decimal number and you want to round it to 2 places. Usually you need conversion functions. There's a handful of functions that you typically need in a template engine. And that is basically where we're at with templating. We want to make this as easy for you to try it. The reason I went, instead of just making my own types of data, I went to a stock website to learn what is the data. That's how I learned that it's easy to say, oh, everything is in UTC format and we can trust that. Well, the reality is no, your data is in all sorts of different shapes and sizes, and the template engine needs to be able to support, let's say for V1, 80% of those things. For the rest of it, you might have to massage the data a little bit to add, and by that, what I mean is take this data as it is. Maybe you are using IEX Cloud, or it's data from your own company, data from some microservice you build, or data from anything. You may have to add a property to it. So at one point, instead of open time, I had one called like open time formatted, and the server, as it's adding that property, would do the parsing and do the formatting, instead of the template engine doing it, which is ideal. If the template engine does it, then you can hit the data directly. We're just not going to get 100% of the way there, but we do want to be confident in, can you write templates over the types of data that you use every day? And that's where making this easy for you to use, to try, to tell us, that's basically it. Templating's been in preview, and it will likely remain in preview because it is a new language. We really want to get it right. There's a very high penalty on all of us, on the whole ecosystem, if we take breaking changes, especially, and most disappointingly, if there are things that we could have learned along the way. So I'm here to help you. If you think this is useful, if this is helping at least, raise awareness to, okay, templating is this thing, I actually see how it could be useful for me. That's kind of where we're at today. So I'll start taking a couple questions, and then what I want to do, since I won't be able to get the stock demo working, is show how the template service really takes this to the next level.
So there was a question about, how is data passed to a cart? Like when I submit to JSON with card, where should the JSON be with data be?
How is data passed to the cart? Like when I submit JSON, where would the JSON data be? So
passed to a card. Got it.
So the gist of all of the data gets passed at runtime using the template SDK of the platform you're on. So Thomas, I know is a Flow user. The gist of what we would do, and ideally by Ignite, if at all possible, is there would be a Flow action that wraps this API. Since if you're writing code and you're writing JavaScript code, you would just install the JavaScript library. And you would say you would use this just because it's code. You would pass in the template, you would pass in your data, and then you would say template.expand, and then you get the card. If you don't have access to writing code, you will have to find some way of utilizing this SDK, and I'm not, unfortunately, still not familiar enough with Flow on how to do that. So right now you'd have to use these two SDKs to pass the data. And if that didn't answer, Thomas, go ahead and type it again.
No, and then, I think that was good. Okay. Bill asked, where did the date function come from? Is there a list of built-in functions, or was it defined in the code that generated the template?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. Thank you for that. So if you go to the template docs, and there's a bunch of ways to get here, but if you click documentation and there's the templating preview, the template language page is how you can learn everything about the template syntax itself. And one of those sections, so as wasn't the question asked, but I'll just mention this, there is this concept of binding scope. So we will get to a place where right now, everything I've showed you, I'm binding to the data object, but we think there will be a world where you might want to bind to properties of the host. Maybe you want your template to adjust if you're in a narrow screen versus a wide screen, or whether the host supports interactivity. So you can start to tweak your templates based on things. So that's covered in binding scopes. We talk about repeating items, and then we talk about functions. And that was where the question was. So here is the current list of functions that you can see a whole bunch of not working yet. The functions is our least understood, or I shouldn't say least understood, it's our least fleshed out. So these are the list of them today. If you use the libraries, the JavaScript library, we're still adding it to the .NET one. Let me see if I can quickly pull up. I can show in this PR. So the 3505 PR, I'll send this. Here's the pull request that what you're seeing is built on. And I actually register some custom functions, and I can show you where I did that. Give me 1 second. Somewhere in script. Okay. So with the JavaScript library, so I don't know if there's a way to view this. Let's see if we can pull up an easier way to view this file. 1 second, bear with me. Okay. So this is the script that runs on the website. So as you're, using the website, this is the giant script file that we use that tweaks the browser. So in here, down at line 410 is where I do the data binding. So the binding is happening live, and you can actually see it. So if I go back to samples really quick and I go to restaurant, if I turn off templating, you can see this card changes completely. It's just the straight up card. So this is actually live binding this data and this JSON in your browser live. So if this was editable, which I'm considering making it editable, you could tweak this data and then see the card edit right there, which is the same thing you do in the designer. So the code that does that is right here. I new up the template, and then the context object, this evaluation context, has a method called register function. So this is where I've added custom functions for the website to make this card work. So I added that format function, and then you get past the parameters. I switch on the parameters, and then I write the code that casts the parameter, does toFix, and adds %. So I've added a format function. We will make formatting a default part of it, a default part of the schema. So you won't have to, default part of the template engine, template language. So you won't have to do formatting. Same with parsing dates. We will make that part of the standard, so you won't have to do this. But if you do have custom functions, or you want to get started now, this is a great way to extend the function syntax with your own functions, and it makes it so you can actually start to use this today. Hopefully that answers your question on, is there a list of built-in ones? And then here is the advanced version of if you want to extend your own. And so I'll just kind of highlight this line shows how to write custom. So yeah, that's a fantastic question. Any others?
There isn't any more on the templating piece, but we do have a question on the TAP program.
Oh, okay. I probably don't have any answers.
Well, the question is that email address that you put on that slide is only for internal Microsoft people. And it returns an error, and there are 3 or 4 people on the call right now with maybe a couple more who didn't say they were interested that might be interested. But it comes back as an error that it's only for, what was it, the Microsoft domain? It's a domain issue. So I don't know if it's a permissions issue in the way that email was set up, or if there's another way they could let you know. Maybe we could create a quick survey form and you could gather the right information that you need.
So for now, so I apologize for that, everybody. There is a delay in when you make new aliases before they're internet accessible, but we could have also just made a mistake and forgot to check the box. So we'll get that fixed. I put my email in the chat, though. Feel free to email me directly, and I will happily forward that along to the team. And I'm making a note that fixed the alias. Sorry about that.
No, and once that is fixed, maybe we could just, gather more information, and we could post something on Twitter about the program where there might be people not on the call that would be interested in it. So when that alias is fixed, we'll make sure that that happens for you guys. But in the meantime, use Matt's email address.
Yeah, and that's okay. So please queue up any other questions. I wanted to show one last thing just to try and get a little bit of excitement or generate some creativity. Although I don't know if I have time now to be able to pull this up in time. So what I'll do, instead of doing a demo, and I'll queue it up, is point to a link to this template service. So this is the final and what I believe the most powerful piece of adaptive card templating. Unfortunately, I'm going to end this call saying, read the docs. They're okay. They're they try and walk you through. But the gist of the template service is, okay, we've got these templates. Clearly, there's some at adaptivecards.io. You might have some data from your organization or from the internet or just from your app, and you want to know, is there an adaptive card template for it? I don't want to have to build my own. I don't want to have to click through this. I just want to know, is there a template for it? And that is a key feature of the adaptive card template service. So you could, for example, let's say you're using the Microsoft Graph, and you get this data here, which is a profile information. It knows about a person. It happens to be Megan. And so I want to do a post to this API. Actually, you know what? Since we have this here, we're just going to do this live demo. If you install Postman, you can follow along, but I'll show you exactly how this works. So what I'm going to do, wow, I want that delete. That is very interesting. So I will do a post to this URL, and I'm going to pass in this very data. So this is graph data. This is not adaptive cards data. This is just graph data, and this isn't tied to graph. This is just one example. I'm going to do a post to the templates.adaptivecards.io/find endpoint, and I'm going to pass in this data. And this service is going to analyze this data, the structure of this data, and see if there's a template for it. And it happens to say, hey, I think I have a template here at graph.microsoft.com/profile.json, and the confidence is 100%. So I'm going to use that template. It also found another template that it's only 8% confident. That one probably won't match. It's trying to analyze how much this template matches the data, and the higher the confidence, the greater the likelihood. This seems like a template that was designed for this data. So instead of hitting the find endpoint, I'm going to hit that URL that was provided here, graph.microsoft.com/profile.json, and I'm going to use that same exact data. So I'm going to do a post to that endpoint with that data, and what I'm going to get back is an adaptive card fully bound with that data in it. So if I go to adaptive cards, click on try it yourself, and paste this payload in, you will see a nice, beautiful adaptive card that now I can use anywhere. The service did that for me. It returned that data. That's pretty cool. But what if you don't want to send your private data to some service? Maybe this is sensitive data. That's cool too. Because what we can do instead is do a get on this template URL. So this just returns a template. The service is saying, yeah, okay, you want the Microsoft Graph profile template. You could change this URL to the different templates that are available. If you hit the /list endpoint, it'll tell you all of the templates available. But for now, we're just going to say, here's a get, and it's the plain template. No private data in here, just the template itself. So I'm going to paste that in. Now that we understand more about templating, I'm going to paste that into the card payload editor. Okay, now we get a template with a bunch of tokens that isn't passed with real data. Now, here comes the neat thing. If you're following along, this should make sense. Now I'm going to take that graph data, and I'm going to put that in the sample data editor, hit preview, and now you'll see that exact same card. So this creates a really neat scenario where I just learned a template from a service by analyzing my data, and I can get that template and use the template engines, just like you've seen before, the template SDKs, either .NET or JavaScript, to do the client-side data binding. So I can learn a template, learn how to render completely new UI, it's purely from a service, but never have to send any of my private data to do the actual data binding. And then so obviously if you're connected to the graph, you would connect this up and you would see, cool, now I can bind this template. So if you're interested in the template service, it's an alpha level preview thing. It might go down. It's been pretty stable so far. But if you're interested in it, we'd love to understand how useful is this? Should we keep investing in it? How would you use it? I'd love to just kind of understand if you think this is useful. For me, it feels like the glue that kind of ties all of this together. But you can read more about it there and also start playing with it. Okay, I'm definitely at time. I see one question in here. And then let's answer this. And if you have more, I'm happy to go over. I don't think we necessarily have to stop at an hour unless
no.
We have to.
No.
Okay.
Oh, no, we can stay as long as anyone wants to stay for sure.
Cool. Okay. Appreciate everyone joining. If you do jump off, I understand if you have other things to do. So on the topic of roadmap, we're interested in the dynamic searchable select menu feature. What's the best way to drive that forward, given they've already voted on it? Is it likely to be chosen for development and completed by your team soon? Or should we talk in the context of the TAP for potential acceleration opportunities? Or do you have any other suggestions for us to meet in the near term? So all fantastic questions. What they are, what CJ is referring to, if I go over to the roadmap, is that and input validation get tons and tons of traction. I don't have a fantastic answer for you. We are a small, scrappy team, and we're working on trying to address a handful of things at the same time. And the unfortunate piece is as Adaptive Cards grows and priorities are competing, the cadence with which we release renderer-specific features. We did 1.0 and then 1.1 and then 1.2. We were on a basically 6-month timeline. We're going to try to keep to that timeline, but it's slowing down a little bit. I would say it's still many months out before we start to have proposals reviewed and implementations across all of them. If you are writing a card into a host that you don't have control over, so you're writing a bot in Teams or an app in Teams, or you're writing to Outlook, you will unfortunately have to wait until we release and they roll out that feature. If you are a host yourself and you're rendering your own cards, you have full ability to extend the schema, similar to that little snippet of code I showed where you can extend the functions. You can absolutely add this yourself. There's a whole chunk of extensibility APIs under rendering cards. And then if you click on extensibility, this is designed such that you can extend the schema. So if you pretty much would have to go to a particular page, but let me just show, like in JavaScript, for example, we show how if you want to add a progress bar or a new custom type of element, this is the type of pattern you would write. You would define your progress bar, describe how it draws, and then you'd extend the schema, and then now your card author would able to do something like this, whereas type progress bar. So you can extend it if you can render it, and that would actually help us, to be honest, if you're able to extend it, and then you maybe send or submit that schema that you came up with as a proposal, because this is where the tricky thing with the dynamic search, in particular, as far as it's unique, as far as all the other features are concerned, in that it hits a service, it hits data, it hits an endpoint, and adaptive cards today has never been in that game, aside from open URL, where we open a browser. So there's a lot that we have to think through and figure out in that regard. What's the schema look like? If it's an authenticated endpoint, how do we do that? Can we assume that the data is in the card and it's purely client-side filtering? This is where it's important, as you vote on these features and you tell us why you need them, it's important to add details like that. Does this have to be completely dynamic, like it's actually searching on a web service, or can the data all be in the card? Because that will influence ultimately how we design it. But that's still a little ways away. If you are interested in building it, reach out to me. And especially if you build it yourself, and we can review that as a team, it'll just kickstart the process. Absolutely. Sorry, I didn't have a better answer there. So Tim asked, can we upload our own templates to the service and make it available for other people, maybe third-party devs? That is an awesome question. Right now, the adaptive card templates are here in a GitHub repository that is private. It's only private, so if you're not in the Microsoft org, you can't see this yet. It's only private because I have a whole bunch of compliance and legal and licensing and all these things that I have to do before I am able to make it an official Microsoft repository. It's all good stuff. It's all stuff that is absolutely beneficial to the community. I just haven't done it yet. I will be doing it before Ignite. This is a big thing I want to show at Ignite, at my session. And the gist is, here's the templates folder. So the one we looked at was graph.microsoft.com/profile.json. This is just a flat JSON file. The point of putting all of these in GitHub, it means that if you do want to contribute your own template, add a file and open a pull request, and we can review it. They're currently grouped by domain. So graph.microsoft.com is all of the graph templates. Schema.org is all of the schema.org templates. There's open weather. There's this IEX, is that trading, stock and financial data. So I'm grouping all the templates. But if you have a public set of templates that you think would benefit people, heck yeah, put them here. Once it's committed and approved, it shows up in this service within like 5 minutes. So what you are seeing here is literally pulled right from this GitHub repository. That said, if you don't want it to be public on this public repository and you want it private, the second piece that I want to do with this template service is make it so you can host it yourself. It is built as an Azure function. It's a relatively lightweight Azure function that I don't expect that everyone will want to go to templates.adaptivecards.io to build their own template service. You should be able to self-host this internally behind some auth barrier where you have your own templates. Maybe you have your own Git repository. That's very much something that I am prioritizing as we build this, because I get that not everyone is going to want everything public. So hopefully that will make it very easy for both of those situations.
So there was one more question above from a few minutes ago, and I'm not sure if we answered it. And it was more, it says, what about dynamic updating of data?
Great, yeah. So that is a feature we are considering. That basically is, man, I've opened a bunch of tabs here. Where is my under consideration? I lost it. That is a feature you can absolutely vote on. A couple people already have. It's this one called live data binding, and I think that's what you mean by dynamic. If it's not, let me know. But that's effectively what this is, and it's a little tricky because that basically assumes that if we want the live data binding, we want to get to a world where you can have a single template in Teams, and then you can just send data. Like, just send data. Like, a company that we talked to works on build engine software, and they integrate with teams, so like pipelines and builds and things like DevOps type stuff, and they integrate with teams. And as a build gets kicked off, it dynamically refreshes the card. They use adaptive cards to incredible detail. It's like a really incredibly detailed card showing the steps of what's currently running and which step is completed. But they send a whole adaptive card every time, and it's a huge adaptive card. The UI flickers a tiny bit as it's redrawing that card, but that's okay. But when I told them about this feature, everybody wins. It's the same template, and the data is so much smaller than a huge adaptive card. So that's what we want to get to, where you can just dynamically send just this data. But we are a bit of ways away from both of that, if that is what you're asking for. If it's not, feel free to clarify, or you could email me.
Anyone else have any questions while we're still on?
I was just reading the chat. Good. I'm glad to see some people are interested. Good. Cool. Well, then, thanks everyone. This was cool. Hopefully you got to see a gist of what's coming, and also maybe a nice helpful recap of some things that you can actually use today. Hopefully I see some of you at Ignite. I know a couple of people have reached out, and we've set up some meetings. Yeah, I think that's it. We'll get this recording up and a blog post written.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.